G'day. Today we're talking GVM upgrades. GVM upgrades are a very frequent topic of conversation, particularly if you're driving a North American truck, RAM F250, Silverado, GMC, Sierra. These are increasingly a topic of conversation as people get more and more concerned about the weight that their vehicles are carrying. So first up, pretty obvious if you're watching this video, you probably already know, but what is a GVM upgrade? Well, when you're talking about vehicle weights, there's two weights that you want to keep in mind, things you want to be aware of when you're discussing a GVM. There's the GVM, which is the gross vehicle mass. That's the maximum amount the vehicle can weigh fully loaded on the road. That's this vehicle. That includes tow ball down weight, so weight from your trailer. But the maximum amount this vehicle can weigh, and then your GCM is the combined weight for whatever you're towing, caravan, trailer, whatever that is, machinery on a trailer, the combined weight of your trailer's mass and the vehicle's mass itself. So this is a Ram 3500, but this is downrated for a car license. So this is downrated to 4.5 tons. The tear weight, so the curb weight, what it weighs dry, is about 3,200 kilos, and it's just under 4.5. It's 4495 on the Rego papers. So I've got roughly 1.3 tons in reserve. That's with the canopy on. So put the family in, and I've got roughly 1.3 tons. Now that's oodles for me. Generally, the thing rolls at about 3.5 tons with the family on board, and I've got roughly a ton to spare. That's more than enough for me, but I'm not a big, super tourer or tourer where I've got a big steel canopy on the back of it with all food and fridges and cooking equipment and camping equipment, a tinny on the roof, big bull bar, and all, other number of accessories on the thing. I don't have that. So, but there are people who do often find that they fit all their accessories to their utility vehicle, then put it on the scales and go, oh crap, it's actually over the GVM, that's the rolling weight of the vehicle. What do I do? Particularly when all your family's on board and everything's ready to roll and you're a bit overweight. And because mobile weigh stations, so they roll out scales and get your vehicle park on it, and they calculate what your vehicle mass is, or pulling people into weigh bridges and getting them to weigh them is becoming increasingly common. So more and more people are getting done for overweight. There, a recent blitz on this very thing in New South Wales detected that there was almost 50% of the four-wheel drives they pulled up, over 50% of the vehicles they pulled up had some defect, and the majority of the defects, so the majority of that, over 50%, was vehicles that were overweight. So that's not real good. So, and it's an easy thing that you can hopefully avoid. So if you find out that your vehicle is over the GVM, one of the things that you can do is that you can seek to get a GVM upgrade. And why you would do a GVM upgrade is principally that first bit, but also because if you get a GVM upgrade and you plan to max it out, it's going to eat into your towing capacity. So if you, for example, had a vehicle that was 4.5 tons, and you took it up to a GVM of 5 tons, and you had a GCM, let's just say for argument's sake, of 9 tons, and you plan to have your vehicle fully loaded to that 5 tons. That means now you can only tow, and you have to factor in your tow ball down weight into this. Now the maximum you can tow is 4 tons. That's the maximum amount that you can be rolling with. So you're gonna reduce the amount of towing, but at the expense of what you tow, you can put more into the vehicle. And if you've got a lot of accessories, people, luggage, food, equipment in your vehicle, that might be useful to you. For me, the 1.3 ton circa of weight that I have in this vehicle is more than enough. Hence the reason I've rated it down, and it gives me the flexibility of having cheaper registration where I am, cheaper insurance where I am, and while I have a truck license, my wife can drive the car on her car license without any difficulty and no legal entanglements. So, but if you are not worried about that and want to go up beyond 4.5 tons, or you have a vehicle that's under 4.5 tons and you want to bring it up closer to 4.5 tons and eat into your GCM, that is the amount that you can tow, that might be an option for you. And there's an increasing amount of firms that will offer you a GVM upgrade going in if you drive in and then you've got to work out. There are limits. You can't just have whatever you want. It is actually rated, it's engineered, and it'll depend on the specifications of your rims and your shock absorbers and everything else. So there's lots of things to factor in terms of what GVM upgrades are and are not available for your vehicle. But here's some things that you want to consider going in. Now, particularly if you're looking to buy a US truck. So if you're looking to buy a US truck, F250, F350, Silverado, Sierra, RAM, if you're looking to buy one of those, one of the things you want to factor in is there might be an option that prevents you from needing a GVM upgrade in the first place. And this is a good example. If you buy a 3500, then you might not need a 2500. So what you'd be best off doing is having a look at the curb weight as best as you can, add up all the additional accessories and weight, people, your family members, what your fridge weighs, what your camp gear weighs, what a canopy is going to approximately weigh, add all that up. And if you say, well, look, the current 2500, and just for round figures, let's say it weighs 3,500 kilos rolling and it's got a GVM of 4.5 tons, and I plan on putting 1.2 tons into it, including everybody that's going to jump into it, including my long range fuel tank and the steel canopy and the tinny on the roof and all this other sort of stuff. It's about 1.2 tons of weight. I can't drive that 2500 anymore because now I'm overweight. So then you may jump to a 3500 and say, what's the GVM of a 3500? Now I'm going to have the requirement for a truck license, but if I get a GVM upgrade, I'm going to have that requirement anyway. So how's about I get a 3500, and can I fit the weight onto that truck? And that may prevent you from even needing to have a GVM upgrade, because you just buy the vehicle that can do it straight out of the box. There are some advantages to that. Firstly, you don't have to do anything. There's no GVM upgrade. It's just straight out of the box. And it does give you some flexibility in that, like for this thing, for example, the previous owner had it on light rigid. It maxed out the GVM. When I purchased it, the first thing I did was I downrated it to under 4.5 tons because I didn't need that extra weight, as I said, and I wanted the cheaper rego and insurance, and I can drive at 110. And not that I'm a drinker, but you can have a blood alcohol content. You're not stuck at zero in some jurisdictions for heavy vehicle drivers. So there was a lot of advantages to rate it down to 4.5 tons, and no real advantages to keep it at the higher GVM. So I reduced it down, but when I go to sell this, the person who buys it will have the option to either put it back to what it was standard, or they can keep it where I had it. And so you've got these two options, and there's plenty of people driving around a 3500 at the lower GVM, which is an interesting thing, because that means that they can, they've got that option. They've got that option of either, when they sell it, they've got something that's nationally recognized that can either go up to the original GVM, or it can be kept on a car license. Downsides would be that there's an additional cost to a 3500, so you would have to weigh up the cost. What's the cost of just buying a 3500 or an F350 as opposed to an F250 or a 2500, plus the cost to that other vehicle of upgrading the GVM. What's the price difference? So you'd have to consider that. Other thing is, in the case of the Ram 2500, the 2500 has a coil spring rear end. This has a leaf spring rear end. So you could drive them back to back, and you could say, I like the coils better, or the leaves aren't too bad. I'm quite happy with the leaves. You just have to make that call. You have to see what you felt about it. But you do have to keep in mind that if you said, I really like the coils better, I think it's a nicer ride, well, you're going to change the suspension. So that may change the dynamics of the vehicle. So you'd want to talk to someone who's done it and get their experience in terms of what was it like for you when you changed over from the standard 2500 suspension to the GVM upgrade suspension. What did it do? Now, it may have improved the ride. Certainly when I upgraded the suspension on this thing, not for GVM upgrade purposes, but when I upgraded the suspension in this, it transformed the ride. But you do want to keep that into account. You don't want to just drive the 3500, drive the 2500 and go, oh, the 2500 is a nicer thing to drive. It may not be that simple, considering you're going to have to most likely upgrade the suspension. So there's some things to think about in terms of, that's a good thing about one of these trucks, is you do have that advantage out of the box to buy a vehicle that just has it by default. And certainly for me, that's an advantage if I was looking to drive something that needed a higher GVM. To me, just in my own mind's workings, I think that buying a vehicle that has been designed for that higher GVM straight out of the box, there's certainly a peace of mind that I would have buying that rather than I haven't been screwing around with the suspension. I've just bought something that's fit for use out of the box. So you do have that option with these sorts of trucks. Now, if you didn't want to do that, or you say, I want the 2500, I don't want the 3500 because of the suspension or some other reason, or I think it's going to be cheaper to buy the 2500 and do the GVM upgrade, whatever your reasoning is. If you decide that you want to do a 2500 and you're buying it new, then what I would recommend that you consider doing is, if you decide that you definitely want to do it, or even you might, but you're pretty sure you're going to do the GVM upgrade, it is definitely worth your while to do it before first registration. And the reason is that not all jurisdictions will accept an engineer's certificate that has been done by a specific state jurisdiction after first registration. What that means is, if you do a modification pre-first registration, that's going to be nationally accepted. So GVM upgrade, if you buy a 1500, one of the common modifications on a RAM 1500 is the 1500 Express. Has a 6th seat. It has the jump seat in between the driver and the passenger seat, and it's bolted down. So what they do is they remove the catch. They allows the armrest to go up and down, which gives you your jump seat back. They put a seat belt in it, and an engineer signs off a certificate allowing you to register that vehicle as a 6-seater. Now, when you have that vehicle registered as a 6-seater, you have an engineer certificate to sign off that you can do that. But if it's done after first registration, then that modification is likely only going to be recognised in the particular state that it was done. So if I get an engineer certificate done in New South Wales and then take that vehicle to South Australia, the South Australian jurisdiction may not recognise the engineer certificate of New South Wales and ask me to do it all over again. Now, if the modification, GVM upgrade or seat or whatever it might be, has been done correctly, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of mucking around by the engineer to certify it again, but it's the cost. And as someone who has done this before, where I bought vehicles with a Queensland mod plate and then moved it to another state and they did not recognise the Queensland mod plate because the modification had been done after first registration, and having to go through that engineer's process again, the engineer process wasn't so bad in terms of, the biggest inconvenience was taking it to the engineer, giving them all the details of the modification, leaving it with them for a time, then going and picking it up. The biggest inconvenience was the cost. And a lot of these costs, depending on the modification and how severe it is, the cost of recertifying an engineer certificate can be in the thousands of dollars. It can be, not always, but it can be a very large sum. It does depend on the modification that's been completed, but it can cost you an awful lot of money. Now, if you get the modification done, in those two examples, GVM upgrade or seat, before the first registration, what that means is that that modification will be accepted nationally. You won't have the requirement of having to go to another state jurisdiction and getting it done and getting them to certify it again. It will transfer wherever the vehicle goes, that modification. Now, it is possible, I do know, I spoke to someone actually just this week who he said that in their business they will authenticate and accept modifications that have been engineered in other states. They will sign off on them, but you want to check your individual state jurisdiction. That is far from a universal rule. I know that with a relative bitter experience where I've had to do all new engineering for something that was engineered in another state because the particular state that the vehicle moved to did not recognise the mod plate. So you do want to consider that. And that goes not just in terms of if you're buying a new 2500, but if you're looking to buy a used 2500 or any other vehicle that's had a GVM upgrade, you want to find out when the modification was completed. And if it's after first registration, you have an engineer certificate or a mod plate, you're going to need to talk to your specific state jurisdiction and see whether they will accept it or whether a new engineer certificate is required. It is likely it will be the latter, and you're going to need to factor that into your purchase price. Now, if you're buying a new one and looking to do a modification, the reason that I would suggest that you do the modification beforehand and have that modification recognised nationally, you may say, oh, I'm never going to leave my state. I'm always going to live in Queensland or Victoria or wherever it is. I'm never going to leave the state, so it's not a real big deal. It's not like I'm moving around. Well, if you do end up moving, obviously you're going to have to recertify. But if you say that you're never going to move around, you've got to remember these things are still not super common on the road. they're not going to be, certainly for the foreseeable future, a vehicle that sells the same sort of quantity as a Toyota Hilux or Ford Ranger, for example. That means they're still a reasonably niche vehicle, and not many of them come up for sale at any one time. So if you have one that hits the market and it has a GVM upgrade or a modification that has been certified before first registration, then the person who can come from any state and buy it, take it back to their state and register it with acceptance of that modification. If you've done the modification after first registration and they're buying it from Western Australia and you're in South Australia, they're probably going to have to recertify that modification. That's going to come at a cost to them. That cost they may want to factor into the purchase price of the vehicle, and they may not be willing to pay as much as they would otherwise. What I'm saying is that it's more valuable. Or if you've got two competing vehicles for sale and yours is registerable nationally and this one is not, well then your vehicle is probably a better buy in some sense, because whoever buys it can always resell it, and no matter where it goes, you've got the option of recognition of that modification. And in the case of a GVM upgrade, you can always have it recognized that it's at this level, or you can bring it down to the car license level and put it back up again later on. So I would suggest that if you're looking to buy new and you go, I'm pretty sure I'm going to do the GVM upgrade, but I'm not going to do it right now, I'll do it later, I would suggest it is well worth you doing it before first registration to get over that particular problem. So there's some pluses and minuses on GVM upgrades, some things to think about. Personally, if it was me, if you are buying new, then I would probably look at just getting the vehicle to do the thing straight out of the box. But if there's some money to be saved and you can register it, you can do it prior to first registration. If the vehicle's a demo, you're buying one that's sat on the lot and the conversion house has registered it. Obviously that, even though you're buying it new, because it's been first registered by that organisation, your opportunity to do a modification and get an engineer certificate prior to first registration is blown. You're not going to be able to do that. But I would suggest if you're definitely going to do it, I would do it prior to first registration if you can. If you're going to do it used, well then you're just going to have to, accept that, when you go to sell it, hopefully either somebody is either buying it from the state that you're selling it in and it transfers to them, or they don't particularly want that feature. It's had a GVM upgrade, but I don't care. I'm just going to register it on a car license anyway. If you're buying used, then, if you buy 3,500, you can speak to your state jurisdiction about what is involved in either reducing it if you want to bring it down to a car license, or if it's been registered on a car license, on what's involved in increasing it. In my particular case, I need to go get a blue slip if I want to get it registered. But this is registered on a car license at the moment. So if I got a blue slip in New South Wales to get it done, I'd have to take it back to someone. I can't take it to the person who did the original blue slip on this, because they only have approval to do cars, and I would have to take it to someone who can do heavy vehicles, and they need to do a blue slip and note on it the increase to the GVM. So, but it doesn't require an engineer's certificate in this case, but check your individual state jurisdiction as to what the requirements are. Now, if you buy one that has a GVM upgrade, the first thing you should ask is, when was it done? Was it done prior to first registration? If not, that's fine. Well, then you're going to have to get a copy of the details of the mod plate or the engineer certificate and inquire with your individual state road authority and find out whether they'll accept it. And if not, then you would do well to speak to some engineers and say, this is what I'm going to buy this. What's it going to cost you to recertify it? And then you make a call on, whether the overall cost of the vehicle, including that engineering, is worth it to you. So there's a couple of things to think about if you're looking about GVM upgrades. You may have a genuine reason to do it. You do have some options to do it, and you can soon find out a number of the providers that offer it. If you're buying it new, it will probably be that your dealer can probably assist you, or you can go independent. And I have done that before as well, in terms of buying a new vehicle and arranging with an engineer to have a couple of modifications done prior to first registration. And I did that outside of the dealer, and I just said to the dealer, when you get this vehicle in, I need it sent to this group, and they're going to do this, this, and this, and then they can return it and you can register it. And that could be true, if you're going to buy 200 series Land Cruiser that's been chopped into a utility vehicle, if that the same rules apply. If it's chopped into a utility vehicle before first registration, that engineering will be noted across Australia. If you buy a used 200 series Land Cruiser and chop it into a utility vehicle and it gets a mod plate affixed, if you're going to move it to another state, then you may find you have to do the engineering certificate all over again to recognise that that vehicle has been certified. But again, speak to your individual state and they should be able to answer those questions for you. I hope this vehicle was useful, this video was useful for you, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you.